Scott Peterson called earlier in the show, like maybe around 10 or so. I don't remember exactly when. And that Scott Peterson wrote a story called Render Unto Caesar and sent it to me, and here it is. Render Unto Caesar, Scott M. Peterson wrote. Al Capone's the very model of modern gangsters. He's believed to have either carried out or ordered the deaths of countless men, women, and children in the 1920s. Among them was a longtime rival named Bugs Moran, who tried to kill Capone but failed. So Al got even by hiring Machine Gun Jack McGurn to pose as one of two policemen and murder 7 of Moran's men on February 14, 1929, forever memorializing the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. Prohibition is what fueled Capone's rise to power. Corruption is what protected it. McGurn's disguises weren't mere copies. They were the real deal offered by Chicago policemen for a price. Others had actual cops inside. Bootleggers couldn't tell which was which. That helped Capone build a racketeering empire valued at $1.3 billion, all the while keeping his place as a good Catholic. The title comes straight from the top. The book of Matthew, chapter 22, verse 21, says, They say unto him, Caesar's. Then saith he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's. And one of those things was judicial torture, something the Vatican couldn't let go of until 13 other nations had around 1810, giving the term render a very special meaning to Capone in the very century he was born. Pay up or die. One good papist in these parts is Linnell Johnson, president of the Mendocino Coast Hospitality Center, a homeless shelter called Hostility House by many homeless people. She's been on the board of directors for 9 long years at that operation. Now she's president. Linnell offers prayers before every board meeting, then ushers the public out, even though that's where all her money comes from, just like the Pope does, only without a fancy hat. Johnson fixed that by lying under oath, not directly, but through a stooge named Paul Davis, who swears that Johnson's little scam gets 0 government assistance, when in fact it's totally reliant on it. Yeah, just look at the filing. Then compare it to Johnson's latest Form 990. Linnell Johnson is either a complete liar or she's off her rocker. Another feature that Form 990 reveals is MCHC's secrecy. Linnell doesn't allow her fellow board members to review them before filing, because if they did, they'd spot certain irregularities, like the amount of payroll taxes MCHC shells out. Last year, that expense ran 18% of payroll. That's what Linnell says anyway. The year before that, it was only 13%. The year before that, it was only 9%. During Ms. Johnson's first year on the board there in 2008, it was 0%. Prompting me to wonder if she'd ever pulled that off before. And sure enough, she had. New York City has a nonprofit botanical garden, just like the one we've got south of Fort Bragg. The New York Botanical Garden is larger, as you might expect, posting $89,052,892 in revenue on their 2014 Form 990. They did that with 872 employees and 1,000 volunteers. That's about a 1-to-1 ratio of employees to volunteers, each pair delivering $100,000 in revenue, give or take. The payroll taxes there are pretty steady, averaging 6% of total payroll. Check. Now let's compare that to our botanical garden, where Ms. Johnson cut her nonprofit teeth. Mendocino Coast Botanical Gardens was founded as a nonprofit in 1981. It hosted a lackluster slate of board members until hotshot Linnell Johnson came to town. When she became president there in 2003, the payroll taxes matched those of our Big Apple peer at 7%, but not for long. By 2011, they'd dropped to nothing. That's right, 0. MCBG reported $684,070 in payroll for that year, but no payroll taxes. In the 5 years since then, MCBG has paid them only 1 year. That was in 2016, where they ran 7% on payroll of $761,212. Board members there would have been oblivious to that. Why? Because just like Linnell's current venue, they weren't allowed to review the Form 990 before it was filed. That bizarre practice went on for 5 long years, only stopping 2 years after she'd left. So that's a good year to measure Linnell Johnson by. 2011, her last year on MCBG's board, when she was once again president. The ratio of volunteers was about 1-to-1 then, yet each pair only delivered $44,589 in revenue, less than half that of our East Coast counterpart, and that's only if Linnell was being truthful on that Form 990. So let's see what happened since then. Things went to hell after Linnell left the Mendocino Coast Botanical Garden, and that's putting it mildly. Revenue hasn't changed much, but the staffing sure has. According to the 2016 Form 990, MCBG has 44 employees and, get this, 350 volunteers. So now it takes 9 people to bring in the same amount that only 2 generated only 5 years ago, and nearly 20 to match the performance of the nonprofit Botanical Garden in New York City. But that's only if Linnell's records there are any good, and who they've been good to. During MCBG's 5-year blackout, something miraculous happened. Under Linnell's staunch Republican leadership, wages were sky high. That's right. The average annual compensation during that time period was $25,458. 2016, that amount dropped to $17,300. Average wages are climbing at Linnell's latest gig, too. At least according to Linnell, back in 2010, the average worker at MCHC earned only $2,647, and there were only 15 of them. By 2016, that had shot up to $20,265 with 36 employees. Wow! In 2011, MCHC served 27,184 meals to the disadvantaged. In 2016, that amount dropped to $23,167, which, at 2 meals a day, translates to 32 homeless people that Linnell's been feeding there, which on her meager $1,086,554 budget is a whopping $33,955 per hungry mouth, according to Linnell. But what part of that money did they actually receive? According to Linnell's treasurer, Jerry Thomas, that amount averaged $28.66. And Linnell didn't give it away. 58 homeless people had to work for it. Linnell's books are kept by a fellow named Paul Davis, who, according to the California State Board of Accountancy, isn't a CPA. And according to just about everybody, Linnell's financial statements have never been audited. Imagine that. Payroll fraud happens all the time. That's what the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners says, anyway. According to themselves, 27% of all businesses get ripped off that way, twice as much in companies with fewer than 100 employees, even more so in nonprofits. The average instance is about 3 years, and the simplest way to do it is with something called ghost employees. Ghost employees can only be created by an insider with access to the business's accounting system, where identities can be faked and time cards fabricated. Once that's done, paychecks are deposited directly into the thief's bank account. Spotting that scheme isn't exactly rocket science. All you have to do is look for variations in the amount of payroll taxes that get declared. They're either too high, like the ones at Linnell's little homeless shelter, or too low, like the ones at her little botanical garden. Another dead giveaway is the practice of hiding Form 990s from the board of directors, like Linnell's done in both places. So what happens if something like that shows up? You call in a specialist. When fraud is suspected, it's time to call in the heavy artillery. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners has plenty of them. They've even got an acronym for their specialists, CFE, so they've got to be cool. One of the top picks on Google for that category is a woman named Jacques James out in St. Louis, Missouri. So I gave her a holler. Ms. James' outfit is called ARA Fraud and Forensic Services, and her website looks like the real deal, posting tips titled 10 Red Flags to Detect Payroll Fraud. But the only red flag I detected was Jacques. I post my articles to Google Drive so they can be fixed on the fly. More often than not, I'll put words in the mouths of my interview subjects, after which I'll give them a link to the draft piece so they can correct anything that's wrong. Well, that didn't go over so well with Ms. James. After sending her an email titled Media Inquiry Follow-Up, Ms. James said she had no clue that I was a reporter. Then she demanded that I remove her name from my article, which I did. But that wasn't good enough. Her next email called my interview with her unethical, and she said she wanted nothing to do with my article. Fine, but I still had one last question for her. By then, I'd found a 16-page white paper on the same subject written by a CPA, something that Ms. James isn't. The author of that paper is rock star Gary Rubin in Chicago. He listed 48 red flags there. One of them is evasiveness, so that's what I asked Jacques. Wouldn't that apply to certified fraud examiners, too? Gee, I must have hit a nerve because she sent me to her lawyer. That's Sarah Stock. She's got a website, too. Sarah Stock appears to specialize in mergers and acquisitions, something I've got no interest in. Ms. James was threatening me with legal action for putting her name in my article, which sounds more like personal injury to me. Nonetheless, I thought they both deserved a chance to bone up on the First Amendment of the United States Constitution and get back to me once they figured out what kind of action that'd be. Until then, I wanted to know what Mr. Rubin had to say. Right off the bat, Rubin challenged one of the figures from the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. 27% sounds way high to me, Rubin said. He'd been at it since 1981, so he should know. I also asked him about the absence of CFEs on his checklist. There's nothing a CFE can do that a CPA can't do, Rubin told me. Why get an extra person involved? Rubin sees multi-year line-item lookbacks as essential to running a business, ditto for bar charts and graphics if they help. People tend to distance themselves from finance, Rubin told me. But is that true in well-run companies? Rubin says no. Well-run companies have no problem looking at risk factors for fraud. He said good managers don't mind rolling their sleeves up for that. But what about encounters with mall cops like Jacques James? Does that come as a shock to them? No, Rubin told me, it doesn't. Rubin put his checklist together to simplify risk management, not to complicate it. Most companies already have a CPA, Rubin said. Why not use what you've got? My final question involved a couple of 10-year lookbacks shown in bar charts for the Mendocino Coast Botanical Gardens, but with the name removed. Would they indicate risk factors? Interest expense is one of them. I thought I'd spotted a whopper on the Form 990s for the Mendocino Coast Botanical Garden, where over a 10-year period they'd run $3,000 a year without a mortgage, and then suddenly $40,000 a year on a $90,000 mortgage. So I ran a no-name bar chart of that little gem by Mr. Rubin. He didn't see a problem with that, depending on when the loan was taken out and what the interest rate was. Oh, well. Then we got to the secrecy part and Linnell Johnson's policy of not sharing Form 990s. I can't imagine why anybody would want to do that, Rubin told me. That's definitely a risk factor. I told Rubin about 5 local nonprofits that I know of with that policy. Had he ever seen that before? Hell, Rubin told me. I've never even heard of that before. The kicker was MCBG's bar chart for a $750,000 payroll, with payroll taxes some years and no payroll taxes for others. What did Rubin think of that? Oh, something seems wrong about payroll taxes on the first chart, he said. They should be a relatively constant % of payroll expense. I'd promised to send Gary a draft of my article, as I'd done with Ms. James, just as I did with her. I told Mr. Rubin I'd be putting words in his mouth that he was welcome to correct. His response to that was like day and night. I look forward to reading the first draft of your article, he told me. When I sent him a link, he shot me a 2-word response. Fire away. Cooperation seems like a no-brainer working with finance people. The last thing I'd want is a pencil pusher with an attitude, much less somebody who can't answer a simple yes or no question without calling in their frickin' lawyer. Ditto for any finance professional. Being from the Emerald Triangle, where over half the populace break the law every day, prompted another out-the-door question. People get locked up for marijuana-related offenses here all the time, but do they ever go to jail for tax evasion? Gary laughed at that one. I live in Chicago. Have you ever heard of Al Capone? Tax evasion is precisely what sent Al Capone to prison. Murder prosecutions need witnesses, and there was a shortage of those. Ditto for organized crime, where gunmen like Jack McGurn kept coming down with cases of high-velocity lead poisoning. But Capone, like Linnell Johnson, didn't pay his taxes. It took only one witness to put him away on that charge, Uncle Sam. Capone fought at hammer and tongs, but got convicted nonetheless. Capone began his 11-year prison sentence in Atlanta's federal penitentiary in May of 1932 at age 33 and a weight of 250 pounds. He also had a couple of uninvited companions, syphilis and gonorrhea, not to mention a slight nose candy problem that had perforated his septum. The following year, he was transferred to a lovely tropical paradise called Alcatraz to finish out his time, something that proved to be no picnic for Capone. After repeated beatings and at least one stabbing, he was finally paroled on November 16, 1939, but his punishment was far from over. After his release from prison, Capone was referred to Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore for late-stage syphilis, but they wouldn't take him. A second-rate hospital down the road did, Union Memorial Hospital, but discharged him on March 20, 1940. 6 years later, his own doctor concluded that Capone's mental state had deteriorated to that of a 12-year-old child. Then, on January 25, 1947, Al Capone was finally rendered unto his Caesar. Et tu, Brute? P.S. The illustrated version of this article with snarky photo captions and hyperlinks can be found by going to tinyurl.com/renderuntocaesar3.